Hello and welcome to Current Affairs on JTV. Joining me today are two historians ready to debate two different topics. I have Norman Finkelstein on Skype and also Ken Spiro on Skype. Now, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Our first topic today is going to be whether Israel is held to a double standard when it comes to international criticism. Ken Spiro, I'm going to start with you. What do you say to that question?
Absolutely. There's no question in all international forums, Israel is definitely held to a double standard. I mean, the most glaring example is, of course, the United Nations, where there are more UN resolutions condemning Israel than every other country in the world combined. And when the Human Rights Council gets together, automatically, it's item number 7, always debates Israel. It's an automatic issue. So Israel gets an inordinate amount of play and focus in the media, to the exclusion, of course, of many other huge human rights issues and humanitarian tragedies in the world. Statistically, it stands out like a flashing red light, absolutely.
Norman, do you have a different view on that?
Well, it would be useful if Israel were held to any standard. The problem is not that Israel is held to a double standard. The real problem is Israel is held to no standard. Now, it's quite correct that there are many UN resolutions on the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's also quite correct that Israel has been repeatedly condemned in all the representative and authoritative venues in the international arena, whether it be the International Court of Justice, the UN General Assembly, the UN Security Council, human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. It's absolutely true, as your other guest suggests, it has been repeatedly condemned. But then the question is it held to the standard? Has the condemnation produced any material results? So let's take those obvious...
Let's stop there for a second. We'll look at the results in a moment, but I want to just stay with this point about the actual condemnation. So in your view, there's nothing wrong with Israel being condemned in this way. You think it's right that Israel is being condemned, and you don't think Israel's being singled out.
Well, the point is, had there been action taken when the initial condemnation was issued, it wouldn't be repeatedly condemned, because it would have been forced to respond to the initial condemnation. The reason it's constantly, repeatedly condemned is because it ignores and is enabled to ignore the condemnations. Israel has been condemned about the settlements since 1967. That is a half century ago. Had it been forced to cease building settlements a half century ago, you wouldn't have a deluge of resolutions condemning the settlement expansion by Israel.
Okay, Ken, Norman is suggesting it's original sin, if you like, that's caused this condemnation. What's your view?
Well, first of all, that's assuming there's two assumptions being made here. Number one is that the condemnations are legitimate. And number two is they come from organizations that are objective. Now, I would argue, first of all, that most of the condemnations are not legitimate. They're coming from a place that is based on much deeper animus towards Israel than issues like settlement, and coming from a place of basically the desire to delegitimize Israel. The original sin of Israel is that it exists. And also that the notion that these organizations, just because they're NGOs or because they're international organizations that the world community participates in, does not make them in any way objective. They're clearly the UN, which General Assembly, for instance, it's a voting organization. All the countries that are members vote in that organization, and based on their own biases and their political agenda, there's an automatic majority to condemn Israel no matter what it does. And the issue is not about things like settlement, and it's about fundamental issues about how Israel is perceived. And we see that, if you go by Sharansky's 3 Ds, in terms of what separates legitimate from illegitimate criticism of Israel, number 1 is demonization. Number 2 is double standard. And number 3 is delegitimization. And we see that all three of those are constantly being applied to Israel, that Israel is demonized as the most pariah, evil state in the world, that there's a double standard, that other countries are not held to the standard that Israel's held to. Israel's held to a standard far higher than any other country. And the delegitimization of Israel is really the basic issue of all. It's many countries in the world, especially Arab states, from 1948, pre-1948, it's their inability to deal with a Jewish state of any size. They were trying to destroy Israel before there were any settlements. They tried to destroy Israel after the UN voted November 29, 1947 to create a Jewish state. That's the fundamental issue. Israel offered after 1967. Professor Finkelstein talked about it. It's been ignoring settlement policy. Levi Eshkol offered right after the 67 war, which was a war started to destroy the Jewish state, the second attempt after 48. We'll give you the land. Just make peace. And the Arab League gets together in Khartoum in August 67. No peace, no negotiation, no acceptance of Israel.
Okay, Norman, it's about more than just settlements, isn't it?
The issue question put was whether Israel's held to a double standard. The response by your other guest, was that, of course, it's obvious they're held to a double standard because look at all the resolutions condemning them. I then responded that the reason there are so many resolutions condemning them is because Israel simply ignores the resolutions. Now, Ken proceeds to give some Israeli propaganda points, which unfortunately have nothing to do with reality. One of the problems with debates like this is people have no knowledge of the facts. They go to an Israeli propaganda sheet and they simply read off of this propaganda sheet the nonsense of the Israeli government. So let's go through the stuff that Ken said, because I believe in facts. It's a British proverb that goes back a long way. The proverb is, facts are stubborn things. And I want to go back to those stubborn things. Number one, Ken said the people who condemn the settlements are partisan. They're prejudiced. They're anti-Israel, maybe anti-Semitic. Who was the first one to condemn the settlements as illegal? The very first person. The very first person was the legal advisor to the Israeli government, Theodore Meron, M-E-R-O-N. Meron went on to become a very respected international jurist. At the time, in 1967, he lived in Israel, and he was the legal advisor to the Israeli government. They put to him the question, are the settlements legal? He said, no, they're not legal. The Israeli government acknowledged they weren't legal, privately. Meron was then asked a couple of years ago, do you still stand by the statement you made in 1967? He said, yes, it's true. The settlements are illegal. Allow me to finish.
I will, but just remember, it's a TV show, not a lecture. That's all I'm saying. Very important you put the facts across, but do try and put them across in a pithy manner.
If you want to just chat, then you should cut me off. I'm interested in facts. I'm not interested in chatting, and I'm not interested in propaganda. In 2006, the International Court of Justice ruled on the legality of the wall Israel is building the West Bank. All 15 judges, not one, not two, not three, not a plurality, not a majority, all 15 judges said the wall was illegal. Those 15 judges included the British judge, Rosalind Higgins, who is Jewish. It included Thomas Bergenthal, the American judge, who is a Holocaust survivor. He said the settlements are illegal. Now, is Ken trying to tell me and tell your audience with his stupid Israeli propaganda that all 15 judges in the International Court of Justice, all 15 are anti-Semitic, anti-Israel? Is that the argument he wants to make? That's nonsense. That's not believable. That's not plausible. That's the flat Earth society.
Well, let's Ken respond to that then.
First of all, number one, we're not talking, the debate is not about settlements. The debate is about double standard. And as a matter of fact, as much as Professor Finkelstein would like us to believe that these issues are clear-cut, that the settlements are a violation of international law, and there's all kinds of precedents will bring in, the reality is it's not that clear, and it's not a debate on the legal intricacies of, and nor am I quoting Israeli propaganda. I find it kind of condescending, actually. The notion, by the way, that judges, because they're Jewish, are going to be more like properly disposed towards Israel. I mean, Professor Finkelstein is a great example of that himself, being Jewish and a child of Holocaust survivors, but nonetheless is a strong advocate of condemning Israel more than almost anyone else in the world. So that's not really the issue. But the fact of the matter is we're back to the issue we're discussing is the issue of a double standard. Israel is absolutely held to a double standard. There are major humanitarian crises that have been going on in the world for decades that major international bodies such as the UN and the Security Council have ignored while hyper-focusing on Israel as if it is the greatest humanitarian problem in the world. The fact that Israel doesn't respond to these and the fact that world bodies vote for them does not in any way discredit what I'm saying. I'm sorry. Simply put, the issue is the lack of fairness towards Israel, and why should anyone or any country respond to resolutions and a double standard and try and defend itself or correct its actions when it's being condemned unfairly? It's sort of like the Jews defending themselves in front of Hitler, making accusations about the Jews over and over again about being responsible for Germany's economic problems and World War I and you name it. There's no point to responding to such things in any way because they're just not coming from a place that's in any way objective. So I don't think that's the professor's not really, I don't think, addressing the issue. He's focusing on the legal intricacies, which you could debate all night, by the way, and it's not the forum for it.
It's very complicated. It's very complicated. The legal intricacies. It was so complicated, so intricate, that all 15 judges on the International Court of Justice declared them illegal. That's very close, very intricate, very complicated. Allow me to finish. He says that Israel is held to a double standard. Let's look at the double standard. During Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, Israel killed 1,400 Palestinians, destroyed 6,300 homes, killed 350 Palestinian children. What happened as a result of that? Israel prosecuted one soldier. One soldier got 7.5 months in jail for stealing a credit card. Stealing a credit card. That was the result of killing 1,400 Palestinians, 1,200 of whom were civilians, 350 of whom were children, 6,300.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is this is a classic example of.
Well, can I just interject on this point?
It's not the topic. We're not debating it. The professor is saying everything totally out of context. He's ignoring Hezbollah's terrorist tunnels. He's ignoring the thousands of missiles targeting Israeli civilians. He's just sorry.
Okay, guys, you need to one at a time. Look, let me just interject here for a second. Now, Norman, you're raising points. You raised, for example, Operation Cast Lead. Now, it should be obvious to anyone that the methods the Israeli army employed in that conflict, which have been spoken about numerous times by officers from other armies, exceeds that of any other Western country in terms of how they tackled things.
You're just speaking the biggest nonsense on God's earth.
Well,
you haven't
I don't think so.
You're talking about. You're talking about Kemp, Ron Kemp. You quote one person. Have you read the human rights report?
No. It's not just Richard Kemp.
Excuse me, sir, but I take deep offense at what you're saying because people are dead. Children are dead, and you're just speaking nonsense. There were
Israeli children are dead. Thousands of missiles were shot indiscriminately into civilian populations. No country in the world would tolerate such behavior. I'm sorry, Professor is just focusing exclusively on one side of the story.
Okay, let's.
Excuse me, sir. There were 300 human rights reports written on Operation Cast Lead. How many have you read? I read 300 of them. How many of you read? You just speak because Ron Kemp, that imbecile, that paid for Israel.
Okay, I think we need to. Let's.
No, it's
okay.
despicable. It's despicable how you carry on with your red tie and your crossed legs when people are being killed. And you cite the most ridiculous.
Norman Finkelstein, where's your concern for the people of Syria? The 250,000 dead in Syria. How many reports in Syria have you read? How many? How many condemnations of the United Nations have you read there?
I don't about Syria every day.
And where's your condemnations of the United Nations? Where are they? Where are they?
I don't hear apologists like you. I hear
Where are they, Norman Finkelstein? Where are they? Where are the condemnations internationally?
To be a certifiable moron if you haven't heard condemnation of Syria.
I haven't at the United Nations. I haven't seen one resolution passed.
Dead if you haven't heard condemnation.
Not one resolution passed.
That's it. Conversation. You're brain dead. I'm not having a conversation with somebody who's brain dead. If you haven't heard every day, non-stop.
Well, you're not really having a conversation, are you? It's a diatribe.
Bashar Assad's assaults on civilians in Syria, then you're brain dead.
Okay, I think we need to dial it down just a little bit. Let's not get overexcited.
I don't want to go on because you don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen such stupidity being...
Well, I'm sorry to say that it looks like challenging Norman Finkelstein has led to him leaving the programme. Ken, do you have any final thoughts on what you've seen and heard today?
Unfortunately, I used to formally debate. One thing I know is you have to stick to the topic and B, not be insulting. And unfortunately, I've seen Norman Finkelstein in action before, and that's the classic yell, scream, quote facts, and insult. And unfortunately, I don't think he made his case. And he operates in he's very good at quoting statistics and much of them out of context and operating in a very narrow focus, unfortunately. And rather than have a civilized debate on the issues, it unfortunately degenerated into what it degenerated into. But the reality is you don't have to be a PhD and spend your whole life studying history to recognize it's very clear that Israel is absolutely held to a ridiculous double standard. And with all the tragedies going on in the world, it just bodes very ill for the moral standard of the world collectively when so many people are being slaughtered and exiled, and yet the world seems to have nothing better to do than hyper-focus on the only democracy in the Middle East.
It does indeed,
with
Ken
free
Spiro.
market capitalism, democratic country. And you can use fancy terms and quote statistics, but the amount of judges and organizations to condemn Israel doesn't impress me. Anyone looking objectively...
I can see your point, Ken. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for staying on the programme as well till the end. Do appreciate your time. And thank you all. We'll see you again for another episode of Current Affairs on JTV.